Hello, this is Marshall Fightlin, your friendly psychologist, and today I want to continue the series that I started last time on the virtue of temperance. We saw last time, I'll just do a brief summary of it here. We saw last time that a child being raised to practice the virtue of temperance, by the time that child hits puberty, he should be disciplined in the areas of food, how he spends his time, and the screen. And then he's ready for the next step when he goes through puberty, which is to learn how to control sexual desires. So the virtue of temperance has a subset of virtue pertaining to how you deal with sexual pleasure, and that virtue is called chastity. So if a child has been allowed to eat whatever he wants, whenever he wants, if he's been allowed to do whatever he wants and he's been given no restrictions at all, when he hits puberty, you can't expect suddenly for that child to be able to acquire the virtue of chastity. That should have been you should have been preparing for that long before he hits puberty. So let's hope that has happened, and now the child is in puberty, and now what? I want to talk a little bit, and kind of back up a bit, and talk about something that is in the background during the child's training in temperance, and it comes to the fore when you're training specifically about chastity. And that has to do with the strengths of modesty, or the practice of modesty, when the child is very young. When a child gets to be, about 2 or so, it's time, and that can understand speech. It's time for you to tell the child at an appropriate time that his genital area is special. And because it is special, he doesn't touch it a lot. And so you're teaching the child that he only touches his genital area when he has to go to the bathroom, and that's it. Or when he's washing. Otherwise, he doesn't touch that area. So the child gets used to that. You also start insisting on privacy when you are changing, so that you don't allow the child to see you naked. The child will very quickly learn that he wants to have privacy when he's changing, and he will turn when he's changing, or he will want people to leave the room when he's changing. Currently, there's a push, and it's more than a push, for classroom sex education. And from a psychological point of view, that's a bad idea. Education about human sexuality is private tutoring. It's not a classroom thing. It's something in which a parent who has an emotional, loving involvement with the child teaches to the child whom he cares about and loves. The parent will know when the right time is to do that, how much to say, and when to say it, because the parent knows this child. And so the sex education is tailored to the needs of this child. If you move that into a classroom setting, you have 30 kids at 30 different levels of development, and you have a teacher who is not as emotionally involved with those children as their own parents, teaching them about these intimate things, and it's very likely that some of those children will hear things too soon, too late, too much, or too little. It's a cookie-cutter approach where there isn't any specific attention to the specific needs of the child. So classroom sex education, from a psychological point of view, is a bad idea. And if parents, some people will argue, well, the parents aren't doing it. Well, then let's help the parents do it. Let's have classes for parents that show parents how to do that. In terms of, children will start asking questions long before puberty. Where do babies come from? What's the difference between daddy and mommy? And so forth and things like that. When children ask questions, you as a parent should answer the question. And your demeanor should indicate to the child that you are glad the child came to you with that question, and that if the child has any similar questions, you want the child to come to you, and you would be happy to talk about those questions with your child. So you want to indicate, you want to reward the child for asking the question and indicate that you are glad that the child did this. You don't want to make it sound like an interruption. You want to answer the questions that the child asks according to the child's stage of development. When a 4-year-old child asks, "Where did I come from?" you're going to answer differently than when a 14-year-old asks you that. So a 4-year-old child doesn't need to have charts and diagrams about sexual organs and elaborate descriptions of sexual intercourse and things like that. He needs a very simple, brief answer. You answer enough so that the child's curiosity is satisfied. Sometimes people say, but parents are embarrassed, and that indicates that they are not good teachers of sex education, because a teacher of sex education should not be embarrassed. A teacher of sex education should teach with a certain ease. Well, just the opposite is true. Parents should be a little bit embarrassed when their children ask them those questions, and they are answering those questions because the parent is revealing to the child what goes on in the privacy of their bedroom. So the parent is, in some sense, opening the bedroom door a little bit and letting the child see what goes on, figuratively speaking. And that's embarrassing. That's why we close the door in the first place. We want that to be something that just the two of us do and nobody looks at and sees. So when you're explaining that to a child who has no idea before you explain it, there is going to be a certain amount of embarrassment and feeling ill at ease doing it. Just plow ahead. You'll get used to it, and after a while, it won't bother you anymore. But to be able to talk about intimate sexual matters without any emotional consequence whatsoever, there's something wrong with that. And so that a sex educator can do that to a classroom of 13 kids whom she hardly knows, there's nothing to brag about. Some of the points that the parents should try to get across in the whole issue of human sexuality are these: that the genitalia are special, that sexual intercourse is a marital thing, and that it is sacred. It isn't simply not sinful, it isn't simply good, it isn't simply even great, it's sacred. And sacred things need to be respected and honored and held up. So that's the way sexual intercourse should be explained to the child. Sometimes in the past, parents have given the impression that there is something disgusting and dirty about sex. And that is not an impression that you want to give. You want to talk about the sacredness and specialness of it. I'll conclude with a few more thoughts about training, particularly boys. When you're doing sex education with boys, well, one of the things about how you raise your boys is that teenage boys especially should not have loads of unstructured time. If they tell you that they're bored, there's nothing to do, that's a bad sign. You want to keep them busy. That's one thing. Another thing is you want to teach boys about custody of the eyes. Men are sexually aroused principally by sight. And so the boys need to learn how to control what they look at and how they look at it. The screen should be monitored. If there are programs that show immodest things, the family should be not looking at those programs. With regard to girls, particularly when a young girl has her first menstrual period, or if the parents are preparing her for that, they need to explain what that is, again, in lofty, reverential terms. This is an awesome thing that a woman has a menstrual cycle, and that every month she ovulates, and that gives her the possibility of creating a new life. Now, in most cases, that isn't going to happen, and so then she menstruates. And so a young girl needs to learn that she is fertile, and that this is her capacity to be a mother, and that it's an awesome thing. So those are some things that are good to keep in mind when you're dealing with trying to raise your children to have the virtue of chastity. Thank you.